Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and I was always told I had a voice radio. So today, in advance of the US Pokémon trading card game National Championships this coming weekend, I am bringing you the top 5 decks for this weekend's Nationals. Something to get a bit excited about. Think of it like a little bit of a preview. Now, couple of things to note before we get going. Number one, the video that I did recently on Darkrai Dragon's Garbodor, link in the description, that one covers that deck. I'm not looking at that deck for the simple reason of it hasn't been out long enough, it might be good, we don't know, and I covered it in a very recent video. So that's not going to feature here. I am looking at decks which have done very well in the National Championships, which have been going on over the past few weeks since Fates Collide became legal. The other thing I've got to note before we get going, I am not attempting to rank these decks or order these decks. We are in a lovely position at the moment. There is no best deck, there is no ranking. But there are 5 decks over the Nationals we've had so far. There are 5 decks that have set themselves apart from the competition. So what we're going to look at today is what these decks are, and then we're going to have a look at the matchups and the interactions between them. So starting off, we have got Night March. This deck revolves around Joltik and Pumpkaboo, each of which do 20 damage for each Pokemon with Night March in the discard pile. We've also got Lampent, who we don't attack with, he's just there to be discarded. We discard them all nice and early using cards like Battle Compressor, Ultra Ball, and Professor Sycamore. And then we attack with Joltik for a double colourless energy, or Pumpkaboo for a double colourless energy with Dimension Valley in play. Nowadays we've also got Puzzle of Time. You play 2 at once, you get any 2 cards from your discard. This means you're less reliant on double colourless energy than you used to be. This deck is good because you've got non-EX attackers, so you're only giving up 1 prize every time a Pokemon gets KO'd. The fact that you can hit for so much damage means you can one-hit KO pretty much anything, and it is a simple, consistent deck. This deck can set up almost every time. We've got lists out there that are so good nowadays, this deck sets up. The problem, of course, being that people are gunning for it now. There's a lot of counter decks coming out, and the new card End has been released. Night March is a deck that tends to take an early lead, start taking prizes very quickly. You go up by 4 prizes, your opponent plays an End, you both shuffle your hands into your deck, they get 6 prizes, or 6 cards in their hand, you get 2, that means they can get a bit of a comeback going. Next up we have Trevenant. Now I haven't done a deck breakdown of this recently, but it is one that is coming up in the next few days on this channel, so keep a lookout. We've got X and Y Trevenant, who blocks item cards, and that really slows your opponent down. We've then got Trevenant Break, who drops 3 damage counters on every Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field. Nice and simple, and that's basically what the deck is. We've got non-EX attackers, which is good because you're only giving up 1 prize, but really it's the speed of this and it's the trainer lock. With Dimension Valley, you can use Trevenant Break's attack for just 1 energy, and you've got many options to get this X and Y Trevenant out. Phantomp's Ascension for 1 energy, or 0 if you've got Dimension Valley out, means that if you go second and get a Phantump in the active, you will get a turn 1 Trevenant. If you go first, you can use the supporter card Wally to evolve Trevenant on the very first turn of the game. And you will then get the lock, and this lock is so easy to get nowadays with these mechanisms. Now it can run out of steam if you lose a few Trevenants, but the beautiful thing about Trevenant is if you get set up, especially going first, and you get the early trainer lock, that'll win you a lot of games. Next up we have Greninja. Now I did a breakdown of Pablo Meza's Mexican winning Nationals list, so check that out, link in the description. Here we've got Frogadier, who allows you for a single energy to search out the rest of your Frogadiers and put them on the bench. We've got X and Y Greninja that allows you to discard a water energy from your hand and place 3 damage counters. We've got Greninja Break that allows you to discard a water energy from your hand and place 6 damage counters. And then we've got the Breakpoint Greninja. You can do 60 damage, or 80 if you put a water energy into your hand, which you can then use for a giant water shuriken next turn. Or you can do 40 damage, but ability lock your opponent, turn off all their abilities. When you're dropping all these damage counters of abilities and then locking abilities yourself, That sounds pretty darn good to me. You've even got Rough Seas, which can heal you 30 damage from each Greninja per turn. Now, it is a bit of a slower deck, and Hexmaniac or Garbodor to turn off abilities can be a problem, but you can take many prizes in one turn. Next up, we have Waterbox, and I did a breakdown of Tord Reklev's Norwegian Nationals winning list, so check that one out on this channel, again, link in the description. And it revolves around Seismitoad and Manaphy. Seismitoad can either Trainer Lock or Item Lock your opponent, stop them playing items, or you can do Grenade Hammer for 130 damage. Yeah, you've got to do 30 damage to each of your 2 bench Pokemon, but that's alright, because Rough Seas will allow you to heal it off, as long as you put the damage on a water Pokemon. You've then got Manaphy, who gives all of your Pokemon free retreat, and the attack can also heal 30 damage from all your bench, which can be useful, as we'll get into in a moment. But here, you've got Max Elixir to get the energy on the field nice and quickly, you've got Energy Switch to move it around, and you've got Manaphy to free retreat. And this deck is all about options. Yeah, you've got Seismitoad to do a quick Quaking Punch and slow the opponent down, but you've got Regice, who can basically get immunity from EX Pokemon. You've got Glaceon, who can basically get immunity from evolved Pokemon. And you've got Articuno, who, due to his Delta Plus Ancient trait, can take an extra prize when you get a KO. As I've said, you've got Rough Seas to heal all of your Pokemon. And this, like I've said, it's a deck about options. Now, it can be vulnerable to a big KO, i.e. decks that can get lots of big KOs quickly can be a problem, but of course, if you can train lock them with Seismitoad, they're going to struggle setting up. And rounding out the top 5, we have Genesect Bronzong. Genesect himself does huge damage, 100 damage, but you can discard as many metal energy as you like, and do 20 more for each metal you discard. You've then got Bronzong, whose ability allows you to replenish all of this energy, which sounds quite nice. We've got Bronzong Break, who allows you to snipe the bench and take easy KOs, so you can, discard as many metal as you like attached to Bronzong Break. Each metal you discard does 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench. Discard 2 energy, you can, or not just the bench, any Pokemon. Discard 2 energy, and you can either do 60 to one Pokemon, or 30 to each of 2 Pokemon. And you've even got Fates Collide Bronzong to protect the bench, which sounds pretty good to me. Now again, not unlike Greninja, this is a little bit vulnerable to ability lock through Hexmaniac and Garbodor, and again, this is a deck that relies on EX Pokemon, and as we've already said a couple of times, if you've got a deck that relies on EX Pokemon that give up 2 prizes when they get KO'd, if your opponent can take advantage of this and get lots of knockouts, that can be a problem for you. And we've got Simone's second place Italian list, which we've analysed on this channel, so again, link to that in the description if you want more detail on this deck. But as I've said, here we are rounding out the top 5 and giving quick descriptions and matchups. If you want really in-depth looks at the decks, links in the description. Now, what we don't really have time for in this video is to try and rank them and go through everything. But again, in a tournament as large as US Nationals, we can expect 1,000 Masters competitors. Shall we say it's not very likely that you can pick the perfect deck? So instead, let's look at how these matchups go. Now, one thing I must point out, I am not able to talk for 20 minutes about each matchup here. We want to keep this video nice and at a reasonable length. So no, I'm not going to mention everything. What I am going to mention is the key points to each of these matchups. So starting off, Night March versus Trevenant. And this deck really this matchup really comes down to 2 things. Night March can get one hit KO, but Trevenant can Trainer Lock. And if Night March gets set up and can start streaming KOs before Trevenant puts on the Trainer Lock, they have the advantage. But if Trevenant can get the Trainer Lock going before Night March is set up, then it will be very quick. Night March's attackers have 30 and 60 HP. That is 2 Silent Fears to KO all of them. It will not take very long. Night March versus Greninja. This comes down to how much of a comeback Greninja can make. Night March will take an early lead in this game. If they go second, you can expect a turn 1 KO. If they go first, you can expect a turn 2 KO. But Greninja has got the 2 supporter cards N and Ace Trainer, which they will use to try and limit the Night March player's hand size in the mid to late game. And it really comes down to, can the Greninja player use these supporter cards to make a comeback? Because if you can lower your Night March opponent's hand size and then start picking off multiple prizes with the Greninja abilities, while ability locking your opponent with shadow stitching so they can't play more shame in to help them set up after you limit their hand size, you can probably win. Of course, Night March has got Hex Maniac, which can help to turn off these abilities, and if Night March gets too much of a lead or draws out of the N or Ace Trainer, they will probably win. Night March versus Waterbox. Now here, Toad can be a little bit of a problem because of the item lock, which can be a problem for a fast deck like Night March, but Seismitoad's Quaking Punch is an attack, which means it cannot be done on the very first turn of the game. Seismitoad will always have to give Night March a turn to set up, and that is where this matchup is really won or lost. If the Night March player can get enough Night Marches in the discard and a couple double colourless energy in their hand, they'll be one-hit KOing these EXs and taking a quick win. But they've basically got a very, very short clock here. And let's not forget that hitting a couple of max elixirs in the early game could mean that Waterbox is able to use an Articuno and get extra prizes off these small, weak Night March Pokemon. Against something like a Joltik, if you can put a Fighting Fury Bout on Articuno, you don't even need to hit any heads in order to get the KO and 2 prizes. Night March versus Genesect. Now, I quite like the Night March matchup here, but I've spoken to Genesect players who really don't mind the matchup. And there's 2 things that really go in the Bronzong player's favour. Now, make no mistake about it, Genesect Bronzong is a deck relying on EX Pokemon. So if Night March can just set up and KO all these EXs, there'll be a very quick win for them. They won't even usually have to rely on Puzzle of Time to get back their double colourless energies. 3 KOs will usually win it. But there are 2 things in Genesect's favour. Now, number 1, we've got Bronzong Break that we talked about before, and you can use this, let's say for argument's sake, you discard 3 energy on a Bronzong Break. That could be enough to do 60 damage to a Pumpkaboo, KO, and 30 to a Joltik. This can really help the matchup. But it's also Aegislash. Now, this is far from an all-encompassing thing. This is not a guaranteed win. It blocks attacks from Pokemon with double colourless energy, or indeed any special energy, but with Night March we're talking double colourless energy. Of course, the Night March player can play Hex Maniac to turn off that ability and attack, but then if Aegislash has a Fighting Fury Bout, it goes up to 210 HP, and with the Psychic Resistance against a Pumpkaboo, that's basically 230 HP. So it can be difficult to get the KO, even if the Night March player is able to play a Hex Maniac. But here, the ball is very much in Night March's court. Yes, Genesect can use Bronzong Break. Yes, Genesect can use Aegislash. But other than that, it really is looking like a win for Night March. Trevenant against Greninja. Now here, it's very, very simple. Greninja needs Rough Seas and it needs to set up. If Greninja can use a few abilities and use Rough Seas to heal off, then it's not really any bad thing, because this Silent Fear will essentially be doing nothing. But of course, Trevenant is going to have the item lock very early on, and if Trevenant can get this item lock on, then finding those Rough Seas, getting set up, even using Froggedier's water duplicates, you're still going to have to draw into all of your Greninjas later. You're still going to have to get all that energy to use the abilities. You're still going to have to draw into the Rough Seas to heal. This is by no means an unwinnable match for Greninja, but here I would rather be the Trevenant player, because Greninja is not like Night March. Night March can set up really fast and stream KOs against Trevenant with a good setup. Greninja can't. Greninja needs a couple of turns to set up, and that means you are going to be item locked by Trevenant. Not always the worst thing ever, but it does mean that you've got to try and get going, because if you don't get going, then Trevenant will just lock you and spread damage and KO. Trevenant against Waterbox. Here, we've got a similar thing going, except it's much easier for Waterbox, because they've got Manaphy and they've got Rough Seas. Manaphy heals 30 damage from each bench Pokemon, and Rough Seas heals 30 damage from every water Pokemon, or lightning, but I would be surprised if you were playing lightning Pokemon. Here you can even set up 2 Manaphys and just retreat one into the other, so you do 60 damage, heal your bench but not yourself, retreat, the other one does 60 damage, heals the bench but not itself, and so on and so forth. Of course, if the Trevenant player plays Crushing Hammers to discard the energy off the Manaphys while trainer locking, that can be enough to swing the matchup back into Trevenant's favour. We did see this matchup in the final of the German National Championships, and make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, it was a win for Waterbox. It should have been. Between Manaphy and Rough Seas, that's a lot of ways around the damage. Trevenant versus Genesect. Now, we actually saw this in the final of Italian Nationals, and once again, Trevenant won. So Trevenant lost to Waterbox in German Nationals, but it beat Genesect in Italian Nationals final. Here, you've got Fates Collide Bronzong. If you can get the Fates Collide Bronzong out as the Genesect player, then Silent Fear does 30 to the active. That's not particularly good. Even Tree Slam on X and Y Trevenant does 40 to the active because of resistance and nothing to the bench. You completely new to Trevenant. But of course, as I keep saying, and I'm sorry, but this is the big thing about Trevenant, if they get the early trainer lock, the early item lock, you might not be able to get Fates Collide Bronzong out. And if you can't get Fates Collide Bronzong out, this is a terrible, terrible matchup. Yes, Genesect is able to one-hit KO Trevenant, but the Genesect deck relies on cards like Max Elixir, and you need to get set up using cards like Ultra Ball, VS Seeker. Versus Seeker, I should say. That's the proper pronunciation. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, when you can't use items, it's very difficult to get set up. Last few ones to go through here. Greninja versus Waterbox. Now there is a lot of Rough Seas. This could be a very long matchup. On the Waterbox side of the field, you've got the Trainer Lock with Seismitoad. You've got the ability to Grenade Hammer to KO the Greninjas. And, of course, one thing you can do is use Articuno early game against these weak Froakies, one heads, and you get a KO for 2 prizes on a Froakie. You have to give up the item lock from Quaking Punch to do so, but it's something that is a possibility. You've also, as the Waterbox player, got access to Hex Maniac, which can turn off the Greninja abilities. And if you can use a combination of Trainer Lock, big KOs with Grenade Hammer and Articuno for extra prizes, then Waterbox has a good time. But like Greninja tends to do, if you can go ahead and use your abilities to take some cheeky prizes, Greninja can very, very easily win this matchup. I would probably rather be the Waterbox player, but it really is not the easiest thing ever. Not to mention that Quaking Punch does 30 damage, Rough Seas heals 30 damage, so Quaking Punch becomes somewhat irrelevant. Maybe if there's no Rough Seas down, that can be enough for Greninja to get back into it. It's very difficult regardless, ladies and gentlemen, and this is often a very long matchup. Greninja versus Genesect. Here, again, not unlike the Trevenant Genesect matchup, it comes down to the Fates Collide Bronzong. Now, the ruling is very, very complicated, but essentially, Fates Collide Bronzong will, as long as it's on the bench, protect your Bronzongs that are on the bench, giving you access to the abilities. And as long as your Genesect gets set up and gets a bit of energy, you can be one-hit KOing the Greninjas, and your deck will likely be a fair bit faster, especially if you're playing Max Elixir. But if you don't get the Fates Collide Bronzong, it will be a massacre because all those abilities Greninja will run through you. Even when you get Fates Collide Bronzong, then Greninja can go after that. They can then use Shadow Stitching to turn off the benched Bronzongs and stop them using their Metal Link's abilities, at which point you won't have enough energy to carry on. And finally, Waterbox versus Genesect. Both of these decks are going to struggle to one-hit KO. Now, Waterbox really maxes out at about 130 damage. With Grenade Hammer, I suppose you could do 140 with Fighting Fury Belt or 150 with Muscle Band. and that's not going to be enough to KO a Genesect. But like with all these Waterbox matchups, if you can get some early quaking punches to slow your opponent down, you can go ahead and get yourself some winning. And of course you can play Hex Maniac to slow down those Bronzongs and their abilities. The thing is, if you can get a whole bunch of energy on Genesect, you can go and get one-hit KOs on the Seismitoad or the Manaphy or whatever, and that is going to put the matchup into your favour. Genesect needs to discard only a single energy to KO a Manaphy for 2 prizes. So one-hit KO-wise, Genesect's got the plan. But let's face it, Waterbox has got options, and it's not just a trainer lock. Let's not forget that they can use Regice here to block the Genesect EX. But then again, Genesect player, because they're not going to be trainer locked, they can just use Versus Seeker to try and pull Pokemon off the bench to KO with Lysander. So of course then, the Waterbox player can just try and make sure they only have one Regice in play and nothing else, so the Genesect cannot attack. You see where I'm going with this, and all of these matchups are complicated. What I was hoping to do in this video was give you a brief rundown of the top 5 decks in preparation for US Nationals and give you a flavour of the matchups between them. In just over 20 minutes I couldn't go through everything, and let's face it, even if I tried, you can always play tech cards in these decks. Individual cards, like I said, if Trevenant plays Crushing Hammer, it improves their Waterbox matchup. If they don't, then their Waterbox matchup is worse. You can, with the Genesect deck, you can make your deck a bit less consistent, playing non-EXs like Heatran, and that means that you can help the prize race in some matchups. You see where I'm going with this, hopefully. There is no way I can go through everything. Hopefully, I gave you a nice flavour, and I showed you the top 5 decks. Is Darkrai, Garbodor, Dragons going to join them, going to jump into this top 5? Watch my previous video. I think it shall tell you everything you need to know. Now, you know the deal, ladies and gentlemen. Click that like button. It will make me happy. YouTube recently had a purge of inactive subscribers. It means I lost a bunch of subscribers. This made me sad. But you can cheer me up by pushing that subscribe button or getting a friend subscribe on your behalf. And as always, by far the most important thing, look after yourselves till next time. Oh, there's a comment section as well, so please be nice. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.